We'll turn now to Jesse Mullen, who's a candidate for Secretary of State as a Democrat. He's not here today. Sue Orr, where are you, Sue? Okay, Ken's going to respond here. Do you want me to provide the biographic information?
Sure.
All right. Jesse Mullen, again, candidate for Secretary of State, was born in Sioux City, Iowa, moved to Phillipsburg in 2004, and now lives in Deer Lodge. He's spent 20 years working in Montana journalism. He founded the Mullen Newspaper Company, which has now grown from 2 newspapers in western Montana to 21 across the Rocky Mountain western states. He also owns and runs the Browsing Bison bookstore in Deer Lodge, which is a mouthful too. And I have great admiration for anybody who has a independent bookstore these days. His opponents in this race are Christy Jacobson, the incumbent, and John Lamb, the Libertarian. So I guess the questions I'll pose, and Kenneth Lavender here, who's representing the campaign, will give us some responses. The Montana Department of Commerce spends considerable resources on economic and business development. Should the Secretary of State's Business Licensing Division be more of an active partner with the Department of Commerce in business development? If so, what initiatives would be appropriate and effective?
Well, thank you for the question, and we're happy to be here today. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here because of other events. But to your question of supporting business, the biggest change that can happen overnight when it comes to making the Secretary of State's office more of a cooperative partner with the Department of Commerce and other state agencies is overhauling the website. The website is old, it's buggy, it's out of date. Jesse will tell you, owning multiple newspapers in the state, he has to use that website on a near daily basis to fill out his paperwork on all of his reporting, and it's a pain in the butt when the system crashes 3 times and you have all kinds of other issues, you can't find the right portal, and you end up spending 6 and 8 hours a day as a business owner trying to just file for one of your papers, try 14 of them in the state to get all your reporting in all the time. And what happens with that website as well is that when you file your paperwork to register a new business, you don't get any automatic email from the Secretary of State office that says, hey, you've just registered business. Here's all these links to all these websites for all these resources you can use. The Department of Commerce and others works with the legislature, works with offices like John, like Ben, eventually, and we'll work with those offices to set aside money, subsidies, programs, anything to support those businesses. But those businesses have to spend the time digging through old state websites to find it. They're not automatically given those resources or given a direct link. And so partnering with the office, making that more direct, including automatic emails, links as you apply. I see you're applying for this type of business. Here's the link to this subsidy or program or tax credit that you can imagine that you as a small business owner can immediately apply for and utilize to, more vastly, more in a much faster pace, grow your business. Is something we want to do, is something that he wants to do as well. But the other thing to work with the Department of Commerce that we want to, that Jesse wants to do once he gets into office as a policy is also collaborate and advocate with the Department of Commerce and others more closely with the legislature. In the last legislative session, Christy wasn't around actually advocating on the behalf of interest of business owners or the Chamber of Commerce or any others. She wasn't going there and saying, I've heard from new businesses that have gotten a license from me this difficulty or this problem, how can we fix that with state legislators? She wasn't advocating for the business interests of the state, and so it was making it a lot harder for business owners to try to open a new business, file their new ones, or anything of that nature.
Thank you. The incumbent says that, quote, Montana is the gold standard for elections. Yet she advocates for, quote, common sense voter identification requirements, and we hear a lot about this in national politics today. Does Mr. Mullen believe that we need to do more concerning voter identification, and if so, what measures would he support?
He believes that the current voter identification systems we have are perfectly fine as is. And the attempts by Christie, Secretary Jacobson, and Republicans in the state legislature to try to increase those restrictions and make it harder by removing certain forms of ideas as being allowed and used is only harmful to the state. Because the gold standard that she is talking about is the gold standard she wants to set, but it's not the gold standard that the clerk and recorders, elections officers, and the people of Montana want. And that's what Mr. Mullen wants to work towards, is building an election system which is built for the people, by the people, of the people, not built by a Secretary of State based upon what they think is best. Because that gold standard that she's talking about when it comes to voter ID identification, none of that was done without consultation of local officials, with really the public, or anyone of the nature. So when those laws were put forward and eventually passed, which were then declared unconstitutional by the Montana Supreme Court, that's the reason why they were declared unconstitutional, is because it wasn't built for the people. Because our election system is great. It has really great bones, and that's what Mr. Mullen wants to preserve, is its bones. It needs some work on the outside when it comes to other such things, but most of that work of building a better system isn't through new laws. It's simply providing more funding, more resources, and more help to our local county elections offices and our clerk and recorders, and ensuring that they have all the resources, because they're the ones that actually do elections. The Secretary of State's job is not running elections. It's helping coordinate elections, but its job is not to dictate and manage our elections. That's the job of the local people.
Thank you. And because public lands are so important to us here in Western Montana, I want to sneak an additional question in. What would Mr. Mullen's priorities be as a member of the State Board of Land Commissioners?
Well, his priority would be very similar to John, who's running for state auditor, is doing what we can to ensure that we have as much revenue as we can out of our leasing process. That's both sustainable for Montana, but at the same time, we're not setting arbitrarily high fees that hurts small business that want to thrive here in Montana, while at the same time ensuring the lands that aren't leased, that are our public lands, are absolutely protected and insured and preserved for future generations. He himself, as a father of 5 children, right? Also as a grandfather, he wants to ensure those lands are around for his grandchildren. And so what he wants to see, as well as more funding from the state to ensure that those public lands are around. That we're focusing on sustainability, we're focusing on conservation while maximizing economic development, and at the same time ensuring that those revenues, which per the Constitution and state law go towards education, that as we maximize those revenues as much as we can, we put as much into education, because education is the greatest system that we have as a state. It provides universal education for a lot of kids. That money as well that comes from the land boards funds the food programs, and for some kids that's their only meal of the day. So when the land board's revenue tanks and schools have to make cuts, it's often to cuts like school meal programs. And kids go hungry, kids miss education, kids can't go to college or get a trade. And that's also what he wants to really fight hard with, and wants to work with the legislature and with eventually John and others, is not only ensuring our public lands are protected, we get much revenue out of it, but that our education system is prioritized through the land board, because it is our true future.
Thank you very much, Kenneth.